It's APD Awareness Day. And for me, that's a big deal because I think I have it. And so APD is something we're going to talk about today. It's if you're watching this live with me, by the way, it's April. It's just about Easter. And so I want to say welcome. If you have anything you want to add, throw it in the comments. I'm super excited about this. That's why I wanted to do it live. And so what we're talking about is APD. Don't worry, I'm gonna talk about what that means in a second. But if you know me at all, then you know that I talk about accent and pronunciation and clarity and confidence. And when we think pronunciation, we think, when I hear you pronounce and what I think you said could be two different things. It could be your pronunciation, but it could also be my perception, right? And how I hear things. So I think it's really important today to make a big distinction about these things. And if it helps, give me some questions, because I didn't know anything about this before. And I started looking it up. I went through the rabbit hole, and I'm happy to share what I know with you. I'm by no means, a doctor or anything like that. But I wanna tell you kind of my experience about what it's like, living with this. And I say suspected because I haven't been, diagnosed or anything. But now that I'm an accent coach, this happened maybe around the same time, actually, when I started going down the rabbit hole of this. But I'm really applying it to a lot of the things I know. And looking back, it makes a lot of sense. Like, I would always want the subtitles on. Even, my first language, I couldn't stand phone calls, Again, even in my first language, it's like really difficult for me. But hold on, because I am deaf in one ear. So I suspected it was that for the longest time. So we're going to talk about how those things kind of all go together. But one thing I want to make really, really clear is that there's a difference. Most people know there's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is something I do passively, like, I hear a bird right now. But then I could be listening with more intention to something else, right? Paying attention to that. And then processing is, how do those sounds or those molecules that are hitting the airwaves and then my kind of ear and all the signals that are there, how do I process that into meaning in something that I can then understand, right? And understanding is a whole different thing too, right? Like, can I paraphrase it? Can I summarize it? Like, that can tell me, did I understand? Did I pick up what you're putting down? So just to say, there's a difference here. And when we're talking about auditory processing disorder, we really are talking about the processing more than the auditory part, right? Because, for example, we're not talking about hearing loss, just hearing loss. That can complicate things. I have a bit of both. And we're not talking about language processing, which is already going to complicate things, right? When you're doing something, whatever it is you're doing, watching a movie, having a chat in a second language, that's going to be more difficult, right? So we're not talking about that specifically today, but also I'm not talking about ADHD either. Like, I'm definitely no expert in that. I think, again, suspicions, checking boxes, right? There's often some overlap there, and also that could amplify. One could amplify the other, So all I'm talking about today is my experience with auditory processing disorder, and hopefully that can help you with somebody else, right? So it's how you process. It's your ability to take the signal, the noise, let's say, and turn it into something meaningful and useful, right? So that's from ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association. So that's where I started looking for information originally, and I think that this definition is really helpful for that. So how do I think about APD in order to kind of explain it to other people? I hope this is helpful for you. 4 things that I try to kind of keep in mind. What is it I'm actually talking about then, right? Number 1, the clarity of something. Do I know what the sound is? For example, yesterday I was watching a movie in the living room, and I can hear my roommate talking on the phone, and I can hear that it's on speaker, so I can hear the other person's voice too, right? I have a hard time isolating what's what. And you might think, oh, well, just pay more attention to the movie, right? Like yeah, you can hear it, but it's in the background. It's not the same for me. It's background and foreground kind of blur together. So it's really difficult to isolate and make one signal very clear without having them kind of jumbled together, at least for me. So if you hear somebody saying this or some of these things, right, this might apply to somebody you know. happens to me all the time. And I don't mean like your normal kiss this guy versus kiss the sky kind of lyrics. I mean, it happens a lot, like a lot, even just in normal conversations. This happens to me like every day. For example, just the other day I was with a client and he said, he was shaking his head no. And he said, surprisingly, I did like the movie. And I was like, but you're shaking your head no, because some people do that, right? When they're subconsciously don't agree with what they're saying themselves. And I thought, well, did you or didn't you like the movie? He said, no, I disliked the movie. There was also a pronunciation issue there too, but he was saying no, and all I heard was the di there, and I misheard that, right? I mishear words, I mishear phrases, song lyrics, especially in a second language, but also my first language, right? When it's really quiet, obviously the signal is clearer, or signals are clear, so it's easier to pull them apart. But once something gets noisy, and I mean more noise, and also maybe volume goes up, it becomes a little bit more difficult for me. I am wiped out. I am just wiped out sometimes. And it's not my social battery sometimes, it's just like the effort that I put into going to a party or to a group setting, right? Especially when there's, lots of different conversations going on. Like, this is really difficult for me, and that has to do with how clear is the signal and how much work am I putting into it. Next one, processing speed. Now, this definitely applies to me in a second language. You might know I'm living in Mexico, and so a lot of my conversations are in Spanish too. It's even harder, to keep up. That's just one conversation. Imagine with multiple conversations going on. But processing speed with APD, auditory processing disorder, how quickly you're able to process those things, make it so you kind of have a bit of a lag sometimes when you're talking to somebody. Famous example, happens to me all the time. I'm the one doing it. I don't know, you're driving in the car with somebody, right? And they're speaking. And, I say what? And they're already repeating themselves, but they haven't even finished yet. And I'm already responding, and they're like, well, why do you need me to repeat if you already heard me? It wasn't the hearing, it was the processing. It took me a second to catch up, right, and respond. And maybe that's sometimes me saying what is probably not as helpful as it could be. Maybe I should say, hold on a second. But I can't always keep up, right? So I'm responding to something you said with a little bit of a lag. That happens a lot. I'm always I understand, but I'm just a bit behind, right? Sometimes I gotta put the pieces together, right? Maybe it's not about how fast you're speaking, but maybe in some languages, right, the rhythm patterns are different. For example, in English, because we stress those content words, then the important words, the key words, it's actually somewhat easier for me to follow than in a language like Spanish, let's say, which is much more kind of staccato, and then all the syllables are much closer in length, so it's harder to pick out those important words or parts of words, right? Also for me, the more intonation oriented the language is, the easier it is to pick up the meaning, right? Not just the words you said, but were you being sarcastic? Was that a joke? Are you being sincere, right? Sometimes it's very difficult, or to judge the depth of somebody's emotion too. Without that intonation information, it's a little bit more difficult. Love cultures that do wild gestures and facial expressions. It just makes things easier to process, right? And faster to process in this case. Number 3, what I was just saying, when the person said disliked the movie rather than did like the movie, he said diz. So there was a small mistake there, right? That should be S like a snake, what we call unvoiced, dislike. But he said diz, and that voicing, I picked up on the voicing, and I thought it was did, because D is also voiced, right? This is me. I'm hyper aware of these things. I'm paying very close attention, but often it's difficult to, if I'm not kind of in work mode, it's hard to sometimes tell sounds apart, right? It's hard to tell sometimes the boundaries of where one thing ended and one didn't, right? So it could be vowels, for example. It could be an aspect of a consonant. It could be the connected speech part of it as well. When we say minimal pairs, for example, I just did s and z, right? Vowels, like I was saying, in some languages you have 5 vowels, you only say 5 vowels. For us, we have 5 vowels, but we say like 25, right? So figuring out which one it was, like that can be difficult. So I actually love being an accent coach because things are exaggerated on purpose, and that makes things easier for all of us, I think. Yeah, even people I know, suddenly it's like I'm looking at them and like their mouth is moving, but I am just not picking up what they're saying. So it's funny how sometimes that can happen. And what I mean by category is, like we were saying, that voicing is a category, right? Different kinds of sounds. We have what we call friction sounds, fricatives. We have stop sounds, right? Certain categories of vowels might go together, like what we call front vowels, right? So we might say like, okay, I know it's in this category, but I'm not sure which one of these it is, right? And so, obviously using context and things like that to put it together. And the last thing, the thing that I use a lot to kind of frame my ideas around APD, auditory processing disorder, is sequencing. This is a big one, actually. So I'm processing it a little bit slower, right? Even if I hear it just fine, it takes me a minute to like put together the meaning, but then sometimes it's like smoke and it just kind of goes away, right? And can I like grasp it for a long time? That can be difficult. For example, I mean, I rely a lot, I have to admit, not gonna lie, I rely a lot on maps when I'm driving, but let's say suddenly I didn't have data or something and there was no internet and I have to ask somebody, like in the old days. This is going to be difficult because they're going to say, okay, so you go 3 blocks and then you turn left, and then when you turn left you're going to see a big tree, and that tree is just before the stop sign. Oh my god, I'm lost. Like, you lost me at turn left, if that's what it was. And so like holding on to that and then sequencing can be really, really difficult for people with APD. Well, at least for me. Like, I'm speaking of my own experience. So could be that you're talking to me and I'm so busy processing that I get kind of lost in that, and in the middle of the sentence I have to go back and think, okay, what was the topic of this sentence? Which is especially not helpful when you have cultures or languages that do a lot of run-on sentences, right? Or aren't doing those gestures to kind of back it up, or pausing and taking turns in the conversation. Whew, that makes it more difficult, right? I mean, these days we don't have to remember phone numbers, but even names, I am terrible with names. If I see you in 50 years, I'm going to recognize your face, but God help me, I will not probably know your name. So sorry for that. This is the result, I think. Like we said, maybe the directions, maybe they're instructions, right? I would be asking for repetition, and I might even only want like 1 or 2 instructions at a time, then come back for a little bit more, right? So how we give and receive those instructions, multi-step ones anyways, that can be a little bit challenging. For me, for example, wouldn't it be nice if people just came with subtitles? Like, you're talking and there's a subtitle on you. Oh, I would love that technology soon, hopefully soon. But until then, sometimes I'll ask somebody to send me the instructions, right? Or look for the user manual online, or find some kind of pictures to go along with something. So at least for me, this is really, really helpful, like having one kind of modality, especially if it is just listening. Sometimes that makes it more difficult when it's not backed up by other things. So some things that I've found, like that, some boxes that I was ticking before I dug deeper into this whole APD thing, those are some things I just wanted to share with you, because that was the case for me. And I had no idea, right? And the reason that I had no idea was because I let me just take the slides down for a second. Well, one reason I had no idea was because prior to all of this, prior to me becoming an accent coach and all that, I had a brain tumor, and it was on the hearing and balance nerve on this side, right behind here. I've got an awesome titanium mesh plate back here to show for it, but I was left deaf in this ear, completely deaf, because it was on the nerve, and they had to cut the nerve and take the whole tumor out, right? So I assumed a lot of these things were because I couldn't hear, right? And a funny story too, how did I how did I start to find out that there was a problem? In fact, I was in university and I always sat in front row, second row, whatever was available. I'm a nerd like that. Always sat up front. And one day I was taking my glasses off to clean them. I mean, the professor was right there, like 3 feet from me, cleaning my glasses, and then I realized I couldn't hear what he was saying. And I put my glasses on and I was like, okay, and then clean the other one. Okay, that's weird. Put on my glasses, I could then hear him speaking. Well, I didn't realize that I had been learning to read lips, not knowing, because I was already going deaf in this ear because the tumor was just strangling that hearing imbalance nerve. Who knew, right? So had this brain tumor, had it removed, been deaf ever since, completely deaf on that side. So I've always been reliant on this one ear. I thought a lot of my issues were just related to the fact that I couldn't hear, because I knew that was true, right? So yeah, anyways, just to say, like, it took me a while to differentiate a lot of these things, and a lot of times when people get older, right, and they do start losing their hearing, then we might consider saying, like, is it this or is it this? What else is going on here? So if somebody you know has some of these things, it might be worth digging in deeper. So you can go to the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, right? As we said, ASHA is another one, or if you prefer, British Society of Audiology. What you're looking for is going to be an audiologist who can also look at processing, right? Whew. Yeah, because it's not about hearing. It's about how well, when the input comes in, how do I make that meaningful? How do I organize that into something that I can use, right, in a timely fashion so that it can be useful in terms of time as well, right? Whew. Like we said, because of that, then I have these other challenges, and we call that unilateral deafness, and it's biurnal hearing. If you have 2 good ears, that's biurnal hearing. I don't know if you remember those videos. People will be like, "Oh my God, put in your headphones, and it sounds like you're getting your hair cut, and you could hear the razor go from one side to the other." Well, I missed out on that, but that's the example of what it means to have biurnal processing, right? Because if you listen to any of those videos and you're like, "Oh, I'm getting my hair cut," it's like zzz, and you could kind of hear it go from one side of the other because of the stereo input into your ears. Yeah, I don't have that. And so regular life, forget getting a buzz cut, but in regular life, like, that would show up quite often, right? So for me, big one, sound localization, meaning who's speaking? Who's speaking right now? I used to work in classrooms, and I'd have to tell people, like, guys, you gotta raise your hands, because I don't know who's speaking right now. So this could be hearing, and it's really compounding my APD once I knew that's what was going on. But because of the hearing loss, right, I don't have 2 sides to kind of triangulate where the sound is coming from. So, and it gets worse, obviously, like what kind of room you're in. Right now I'm in my home studio, which is all padded out, and the sound is quite dampened. But when you go into a room that's all, let's say, concrete and tile, like, woo, the sound is just bouncing off the walls, literally. It's really hard for me to tell, where the sound is coming from. So even if somebody is like saying my name, I don't know. What if they were behind me? Good luck, Speaking of speech and talking, sometimes it's like speech is just another form of noise, right? Let's say, so APD is already giving me difficulty in, like, let's say a party, let's say a meeting, let's say a gathering of any kind, because, like, I might be talking to one person and I might be looking at you and really, like, tunneling and focused on what you're saying, even reading your lips, but also the other sounds are competing just as much. The other voices, and not only that, but, like, let's say you're at a restaurant, waiter drops a plate, right? That, and most people are like, "Oh, that was just, a detail, that was background noise." No, to me, it's on the same level as the person who's speaking right in front of me, right? So speech is like noise in a way, and it's really hard to, like, filter that out, right? Speaking of filtering, spatial filtering, and what I mean by that is, like, not just localizing where is the sound coming from, but it seems like everything's coming at me from the same place, right? So it doesn't matter that the waiter dropped the plate, back and behind. It feels like it's just, because I've only got this one place that it's coming into, so everything is going into there, right? And so let me know in the comments if that doesn't make sense to you, the difference between the two, because it's kind of hard to explain, I guess, unless you have experienced it. But somebody you might know who has hearing loss, I mean, for me, it's unilateral, it's on one side, but this could also be the case, or it might be quite different for somebody who has kind of diminished hearing, but on both sides too. So to separate auditory processing from hearing, these are different challenges that people might have, right? So we said, I think I missed one. Let's see, 3. Oh no, I think I deleted my slides for number 4, number 5. So let's move on. That's the joys of being live. So here's my history, right? I had a brain tumor. This was way before even teaching English, I think. Yeah, this was way before teaching in English, because after I had my brain tumor, I came back. Hold on, let's tell the whole story. So I had a brain tumor, found out at the end of college, and found out number 1 because I was learning to read lips, and I thought, okay, this is weird. And then I went out to go snowboarding one time, and actually skiing. I went to go skiing, and I was already pretty good at snowboarding, but it had been a long time since I'd gone skiing. I went to go skiing, and I was all over the place, falling everywhere. But that's normal. It's been a while. Well, I went the next day, and I was still all over the place, and I thought, well, I am tired. Well, let me go snowboarding. Snowboarding too, and I thought, that's not good. I think I have some liquid in my ear, right? I think there's some water in my ear or something. So I went to a specialist, and he's like, nope, there's no water in your ear. You have a tumor. It's like the size of a golf ball, and you're probably going to need to be operated on really quickly. So all that happened after all the, let's say, rehab and things like that. What am I going to do with my newfound life? And I got into, I was thinking about speech therapy, actually, because I had a lot of speech therapy and, still have a kind of a droop or difficulty with that. And I thought, oh, how wonderful. I think I want to help people by becoming a speech therapist. But I said, I don't really want to go back to school. So I became a recreation therapist instead. And from there, I always knew I was good at teaching. And then I started to travel as well after my brain tumor incident. And when I went traveling, I thought, oh, let me learn to teach English. Yeah, I've always loved languages. Why not? And I was teaching English ever since. Well, during pandemic, I thought, okay, I'm gonna see if this works full time as an accent coach, because I had been dabbling a little bit, and all throughout that time, people were always asking me for more pronunciation, more help with, speaking more clearly, because let's face it, textbooks and schools, they didn't usually put that as their priority. So that's why I started doing that full time, and everyone was going online, so it just kind of made sense at the time. So since then, full time accent coaching. So here's the question. After then, I thought, oh wait, this isn't just hearing. There's something else going on. Then I started looking into APD, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm ticking quite a few boxes here. I think this is also affecting me. So how does that influence me and my philosophy and, how I go about my teaching? Well, obviously it does. What a lot of people do is they really just think about the output. Right? They just think about like the speech production, the sounds that you're making, right? And I think about it in the way that I need to think about it too, which is how is somebody hearing it, first of all? Like, are they hearing that difference between s and z? Or hey, if they don't have this vowel in their language, are they defaulting to what they already know? And they're just kind of hearing it that way, right? So I like to start with the idea of hearing and sound discrimination, and how do you hear? What works best for you? Because I think the better we can get at our hearing is the better we can, the more precise we can be when we're producing. I think that's across probably all languages, I would say. So reason being, right, how we perceive things will affect my pronunciation, my production, right? If you're completely deaf, even if you were born congenitally deaf, can you learn to speak? Well, absolutely. If your vocal folds are in working order, if all the other apparatuses are working, like, you can learn to speak, and you can learn. I've seen some great videos of people who you almost might not know that they're actually deaf. And yes, can you maybe tell if you know what you're looking for? Sure, and some are better than others, but it just goes to show that, like, it for most people without very specialized training, how things go in really affects how they go out, right? So if you don't hear the contrast, if you don't hear what's not in your languages, if it's not being pointed out to you, then it's going to be a lot harder, I think, to produce them, right? You can totally do it. I'm not saying that you can't, but the more I think the more we know and we understand, the more we can apply that to how we speak, right? So it could be vowels, it could be, how we're doing reductions. If your language doesn't really do reductions, if it's a syllable stress language where you don't reduce the vowels and you don't have a lot of contractions and things like that takes a minute to learn. And in school, if you learned English in school, then you probably got like this much of it, right? Whereas I spend all my time making sure that people understand the patterns so that they can recreate the patterns, right? Like we said, the voicing thing, that's another kind of contrast. Nasality, a lot of things we don't think about there. Connected speech, where do I pause? Where do I not pause? These are all things that you can like pay attention to when you're perceiving them, and that's going to help you so much faster, or produce them so much more quickly and reliably. Like, this is really important to me. Also, even in your first language, APD, hearing stuff, that's gonna add a lot of cognitive load. And that could be, we said the processing could affect, sounds and what word is this person saying and what was the pronunciation like? Was that past? Was that present? Was it get? Was it got? Was it got? Did I hear that little right? A lot of times it is related to pronunciation, but when we're producing it, then because we're like so busy processing and maybe focusing on pronunciation, what gets lost in the production? Sometimes what we call prosody. Prosody is what we call the music of the language. So when I'm just like, when I'm using up my battery, then I would say sometimes the rhythm, instead of being punchy, right, kind of gets a little flat. The intonation, I don't have that range anymore, right, kind of narrows. So it's harder for me to give that information about my motivation or my how I feel about something. And just in general, like, it's just harder to talk sometimes, right? When you have all these things going on, it's just harder. Like, your cognitive load gets heavier. And we see that show up in both for sure, but people forget about the prosody. And I think prosody is really important because it's what helps us create connection between people, right? It's where, like, the meaning is behind the words, if you know what I mean, right? So losing that aspect is a real shame because you're losing so much more information that people could get. Another thing that people don't think about, like we said, like if somebody has bad pronunciation or they're mispronouncing something, it could be because they perceived it wrong in the beginning and they just didn't know, right? And I see this a lot with people who are much more advanced. Maybe they learned it wrong and they learned what they thought was correct. Like, here's the sound. Okay, I'm going to say this sound. Okay, that's not correct. Okay, let's fix it, right? That's what we call a fossilized error because, your neurons, after years of saying the same thing, they think it's correct, even if it's not. So that could be a mistake. I learned it wrong. I fossilized it. Got to break that bad habit. Other thing is, it could just be like, oh, it's that? Oh, I never knew. I always thought it was this other thing, right? Maybe I just heard it wrong. And once I heard it wrong, I kept hearing it wrong, like those song lyrics that keep coming back the wrong way, So let's think about what can we all do? And this is not just for people with hearing loss. This is not just for people with APD. You or somebody you know, like, what are some strategies that I can incorporate thinking about, like, hey, this just might be helpful anyways, right? In my conversations with other people, in my own learning as a second language, even if I don't tick 3, 6, 9 boxes, if I just take one of them, maybe one of these strategies will help you. So I want to share some thoughts on that. And I don't mean to say like, oh, you should do this, but play with it, experiment with it, see if it helps you. And if it doesn't, then, chuck it out the window. No big deal. This is not a real verb, I know. To language is not a verb, but I think it can make languaging a little bit easier. First language, second language, additional languages, right? They're just some strategies. So see if any of these help you. Let's talk about listening first. What are some things that you can do? Because everyone says, oh, can you say that more slowly? And I think that that's actually a disservice to most learners. Because why? It gets rid of that prosody thing. When you ask me, hey, to say this really slowly, it usually distorts it. It distorts certainly the rhythm, maybe the intonation gets lost because I'm just thinking about something else. Syllable stress too could flatten out. Sometimes it's a good idea, and by all means, if somebody asks you to, maybe, heed their request. But instead, what can we do? For example, for me, when people ask me to repeat more slowly, I said, no, I'm going to go at the same speed because you need to develop a sense of that natural rhythm that people have, right? But I'll repeat as many times as you like, right? I'll paraphrase it. I can do all those things, but slowing down usually is not helpful. Maybe parsing and pausing between those, but that's a different thing. So what are some things you could do for listening? That we said the signal. The signal is something that you might be able to control, right? When I say cleaner audio, for example, think about the podcasts that you do listen to and think about how clear they are. For example, I love Gary Vaynerchuk. I like listening to his podcast, but it's such work for me because there's so much background noise and the signal isn't clear. It's very taxing to listen to his podcast. There's other podcasts though that are clean and crisp, right? And it's like, so it's easy to listen to those. So think about the signal itself and having like a cleaner audio, right? And if you can find those, or see if that helps. This may or may not be useful sometimes, even for me. For example, if you are listening to the audio version of a podcast, is there a video version? If you're just watching a movie, try putting those subtitles on. I know everyone's like, I don't need subtitles. Ha ha ha, I'm so good. Subtitles are a tool. They're there for you to use, and thank God they are, because they have helped me catch so much more meaning behind things. And because of that lag, especially, like I'm reading the subtitle. We can read way faster. I'm reading the subtitles before things happen. I can focus on the gestures. I can focus on what's going on the movie. It's extra information. Why wouldn't I want that? Sometimes I don't, right? Sometimes I'm folding laundry or whatever, and I just do want to listen to something in the background. Or another thing is sometimes you want fewer channels of input. For example, sometimes I want to just listen to the audio of something because I can be hyper focused on that and not distracted by the other things. So I'm not suggesting one or the other. I'm saying pay attention more to see if this is helpful in this situation and this is more helpful in this one, or how it works for you or for somebody else. Because we're not usually taught these things in school to play around with these things. Often we're taught by our peers is like, subtitles are for early learners, right? You shouldn't have to need those. Okay, well, now that we're adults, we can choose those things and choose what's actually most helpful for us and not have to feel maybe that peer pressure by that, hopefully. Next one, contextual clarity. This is something that helps me a lot. For example, when I have a meeting, I go into the meeting, I scan the agenda notes, I see what the topics are, I can then be prepared and know when we switch, right? For me also, very often, if you're sitting with me at a party, and I'm talking to one person, and I'm really trying to focus on that signal, and all this other stuff is competing as well, and then I want to talk to this person over here, I will intentionally say so what are we talking about here? Because I could have probably picked it up and then maybe that attention drove me to talk to this other person. But I always want to be really clear. What are we talking about? What's this about, right? And even if you're, like we said, mid-sentence or halfway, feel free. There's no shame in saying and this was, right? just refresh the topic, because I'll tell you something else. A lot of people, we all get kind of off on tangents and this and that, and sometimes that helps just to bring us back to like, oh yeah, we were talking about this, right? That can be helpful for any conversation. And here's something really big, because often in second language too, we're taught about the kind of individuality of words, right? Word space, word space, word space. But really ideas come in chunks, and thought patterns are units like this. So thinking about like catching a meaningful unit instead of like word, and then trying to put it all together, that's a lot of little Lego blocks, right? But instead think of it as little kits that you can see and catch, right? So this is like, oh, the time part, and this is the verb, this is what happened, there's a verb in there, right? And this is the extra detail of there. So noticing kind of the meaningful units of speech rather than the meaningful units of sound sometimes, and focusing on those can help grasp the main idea and help us decide like what's most important here, right? And if I missed something that sounds like a detail, like, maybe I'll ask about that, or maybe I'll let it go because like I'm a bit tired today. Right? So listening strategies that might help a little bit. Just communication in general, right? Ask somebody, tell somebody if you figure this out, say, hey, you know, do you mind if I sit in this chair right here? Because like that helps me see you better. Or do you mind if I sit over here? Because I can't hear anything on this side. Or like, just ask, hey, do you mind putting up the subtitles? Maybe it's not my house. Maybe I go somewhere else. And, you know, even for second language too, like sometimes the audio is in one and then the subtitles are in another. Like, why not, you know? Just be strategic about it, you know? Say it out loud. Here's something I do a lot. You might not have even noticed me doing it. And sometimes it's to keep the conversation going and elicit, and then sometimes it's strategic in the way that like I missed something. So if I'm hearing you, right, and I'm parsing out the chunks and I catch a verb, but I didn't catch the other words around it, I might say, oh, play piano. Oh, play piano. Oh yeah, tell me more about that, right? Or, oh, did you play piano? How long have you been playing piano? And I might like just pick up on that and ask for elaboration, because if I missed one thing, then maybe I can get it by asking again, or maybe I can just, you know, further the conversation and find out some new things about you. So that's another thing that at least I do personally. and again, there was this thing about like, say it again, but more slowly. Maybe not as helpful as something else we could say. Instead of just, oh, could you repeat that? Right? Instead of repeating, ask for somebody to kind of rephrase it. Oh, could you say that in a different way? Oh, could you paraphrase that? Or I'm going to pick up what I think I picked up. I'm going to repackage it, rephrase it, and then throw it back at you as well and say like, is this what you meant? Is this what you said? Right? Last one, I think. For this is, like I said, it's a two-way street. I really am not a big fan of the term shadowing. I think it's very vague. I think it can be more harmful because it makes fossilized errors worse. If you just tell somebody, oh yeah, go do some shadowing today. Go do some shadowing. You're like, okay, I'm going to repeat. All right. But they often don't have a goal in mind. Oh, you know, listen carefully to all the schwas. And when you hear a schwa, just say, back, right? That's way more productive, for example. This would be, to me, echoing, right? I'm picking out a sound and I'm throwing it back. Just like echo, oh, right? It's more intentional. There's a purpose behind it. And I think you're much more aware of what you're doing. You're just not mindlessly kind of shadowing. So I don't like to use the word shadowing very often. If you catch me, tell me. I like to say echoing, or one of my friends got me this, parroting. It's a little parrot that like can sit on my shoulder when I do it right. And what does the parrot do, right? The parrot pays attention. The parrot has listened to its owner, and the parrot has figured out how to say something and communicate in the right way. It has a very complex tongue like us, right? It's got a lot of the similar apparatuses that we do. And so sometimes I'll say parroting instead, right? And like we said, preferably high quality audio. Like if you're going to do this, if you're going to do some practice, if you're going to do some echoing or parroting, make sure you're doing stuff that's like easier for you so you can focus more on that, right? And you don't have to focus on like, what am I hearing? What am I hearing? Right? Love minimal pairs. I think they're one of the most overlooked things there are. Like we said, S and Z, or what about V and W? Vest and west. Vest, west. Vest, west, right? V, 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 w, w, w. Try to find minimal pair lists, especially if the sounds you're working on, or start with sounds you think you already know, and really exaggerate. What is the one thing? Vest and west is not the best example of that because, well, kind of. It's really like, what am I using? What are the structures I'm using? With vest, it's teeth and bottom lip, right? And there's friction there. But W, it's also voice, vest. But west, it's not a friction sound. It's a glide, and it's way in the back. My tongue is in the back, and my lips are rounded. West, right? Not the best example, but what if I took v and f as in Friday? That's a minimal pair because there's only one difference between them. The only difference is here, right in the voicing. That's a true minimal pair. But if you don't know what you're looking for, it can be difficult. You can do maybe just words that are V and W, let's say, if your first language is Russian. You might think, oh, let me work on the V's and W's. But you might not know how to change that one thing. Try to get minimal pairs, literally minimal. There's one difference. If you don't know them, send me a message, and I'll send you a list. And then really just exaggerate that contrast, right? F and V, the contrast is here. No vibration. Once I know that, my articulation is going to be both for re-say that again. Once I know that, my articulation for both will be better, right? Because I'm not just focusing on one thing, I'm focusing on the contrast, but I'm making sure everything else is equal as well. So minimal pairs are awesome. Do like an exaggerated contrast and then go for those tongue twisters. I think a lot of people just jump into the tongue twisters and they're like, blah, 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 right? And there's just way too much going on. So start with lists of minimal pairs and then build your own tongue twisters from the minimal pairs that you've just done. All right. Another thing, again, these are all experiments. Play around, see if it helps you. These are things that help me. Those modalities that we were talking about, visual, what we call anchoring, right? It might be gestures. I'm not suggesting you read lips, but it might be helpful to pay a little more attention because you might notice when they're closing or the shape that they're in, at least in English, I think. In other languages, like people are kind of talking like a ventriloquist and you can't really tell what's happening. But in English, it's usually a little more obvious. So if you're working on your English, like, pay a little more attention to the lips because we use them more, right? Our jaw moves maybe more subtly than yours. Also, there's this thing called IPA. I don't mean the beer. It's called the International Phonetic Alphabet. That's something that I find is really helpful because we know, probably don't have to tell you, the spelling in English is terrible. So how do I say, for example, boot and book, right? They're both double O. They're minimal pairs because the only thing that's different is the vowel. What do I want to say? Boot and boop, right? B-oo-t, b-oo-p. There's only one difference there. But boot and book are a good example of a near minimal pair. I'm just thinking about the vowel. Well, they're both spelled the same. How am I supposed to visually think about the difference? IPA. There's a different symbol for that. The as in book has a symbol that looks like a little horseshoe. The oo as in boot kind of looks like our regular letter U, but it's just got some slashes. They're backslashes. So I'm not saying learn all of the IPA. I'm not saying learn lip reading, but see what's helpful to you to kind of anchor that visually if you have vision. So a couple symbols here and there, they're going to be helpful for you. What's my number one thing that I can say that can be helpful to anybody, APD or no, hearing loss or no, right? In a second language. Community. Find a community, find a language partner, find multiple ones, right? Cool, awesome, but get feedback. Otherwise, you're just repeating the same mistakes and you're fossilizing those errors. I know that to be true from my use, my learning of French and now Spanish and some Arabic, right? Like you can repeat all day, but if somebody doesn't tell you that you made a mistake, kind of like, what's the point? So get feedback. Another thing you can do is record yourself. I know you're not going to like me saying that, but do record yourself, just use your phone and analyze it yourself. You don't have to share it with anybody, but give that a try, because how we sound in our head is very different than how the world hears us. So start with those things for sure. And I think, why are not my last slide? Yay! The last thing I would love for you to do is just get active in my community. I have a whole community of people who are already there. They're already doing this. If this is for you, they're already doing it. And, we all have varying abilities. We're all coming from different languages. So it's really supportive. It's a great place to be. And it's a great place to make connections. So the link should be down there below. You can join us. We're on the platform called Discord if you don't know that. If it's new for you, don't worry, it's kind of like Facebook groups plus Zoom plus Reddit, kind of all mixed together. It's a fantastic platform. We do everything there. We have 2 free events that I give every month, and you can also come there to just meet interesting people and hang out and have a chat with somebody. Practice your language with people who are already paying more attention. They already know a lot. They can share their knowledge. Maybe you found an interesting reel or short that you want to share, and you say, listen to this. What do you think of this? You can ask a question. You can say, you said schwa. What's that? Well, you're going to get a lot of responses there. Comment on other people's stuff. Like, get involved. I put podcasts up that are specifically about language and accent and pronunciation that hopefully you'll find interesting. So put them all in one place. And then, like we said, hang out in the voice channel with somebody else, and there's lots of events there. So, guys, get active in our community. Think about today's APD Awareness Day, but for any time that you notice family, friends, somebody you know who starts saying these little things, starts having these little behaviors, you say, I heard about this. Maybe you can check this out. Here's a couple of resources. The resources will be down in the description. Please just pass it on. So happy APD Awareness Day. Guys, thank you so much for coming today, and I hope to see you soon in the community. Bye, everybody. See ya.